narcissism versus borderline personality disorder, and why intent matters more than impact when we're trying to understand what's actually going on between those two diagnoses. This is going to be part two. The other day, I posted part one where I talked about NPD and BPD, and in particular about why women are experiencing more narcissistic abuse in heterosexual relationships and why that's what we're seeing so much circulating around the internet. And it's based in research because two people can do the exact same thing, lash out, shut down, manipulate, pull away, but the why behind it is completely different. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and listen to part one. And without further ado, let's dive in to this next episode. I'm sharing what I'm learning based off of research and my experiences. This is Kevin, and I hope that you enjoy this next episode. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not So Dumb Blonde. I'm on a mission to help women stop trying to fix themselves and start understanding themselves by relearning how to not suppress or explain away their feelings and needs through evidence-based healing modalities, conversation, and community. So whether you're navigating relationships, career stress, healing from your past, or simply just feeling overwhelmed by your inner world, this space is going to be for you. I'm Caitlin. I'm a soon-to-be therapist, and I'm currently working towards my master's in social work. With an additional master's in international relations, it helps me bring a global and systems-based lens to women's mental health. I've worked with teenage girls in inpatient mental health settings, and I've helped hundreds of women in Denver find community and resources. This podcast will discuss trauma, attachment, emotional regulation, boundaries, and relationship patterns in a way that's real, evidence-based, and actually usable. Because healing is not about fixing yourself, it's about learning how to work with who you already are. Thank you for being here. So let's get into it, NPD versus BPD and why intent matters. Because like I said, two people can be doing the exact same thing on the outside. They can lash out, manipulate, yell, scream, do whatever it is. They can pull away, but the why behind it might be completely different. And if we're only looking at impact, let's be honest, we're going to mislabel people. We're going to misdiagnose them. We're going to misunderstand trauma. And honestly, we're going to keep hurting ourselves and each other. But before I get into this episode, I want to talk about something really important that I said in my last episode that I feel bad about, and I want to make sure that I correct. I made a statement saying that you can 100% change if you want to. And for me, looking back, that was completely oversimplified. And I just do not like how it came across because to me, it sounded like I was saying, if you just try hard enough, you can change. And so anybody that's taking a little bit longer on their healing journey, I don't want anybody to misinterpret that as, okay, you're just not trying hard enough, because it's just not accurate. And honestly, that can reinforce shame and it can reinforce extremely harmful stigma. So I want to just talk about the fact that access to resources, assisted therapy, nervous system capacity, all of that does truly matter. So this conversation is not going to be about blaming people at all. It's going to be about understanding patterns, context, and what's actually underneath behavior. So now that I got that part out of the way, I really want to talk about why intent matters. Not because impact doesn't matter, because obviously it absolutely does, but because impact alone does not tell us what we're dealing with. And this is where a lot of the confusion between BPD and NPD comes in. And it's honestly a lot of the reason why it can be so confusing and so hard to differentiate these two just because of how it looks on the outside. But the intent has a lot to do with what makes these two diagnoses different and how it's actually diagnosed by clinicians. So let's talk about exactly what is listed in the DSM-5 and what it actually says. And I'm going to start with BPD. So again, this is not meant to diagnose. I am not your therapist. I am a therapist in training, and I'm sharing what I'm learning with you along the way to educate, help build support, nuance conversations, and care. But if you resonate with 5 or more of the following, whether it's you or someone you love, this is how clinicians diagnose BPD. Number 1, fear of abandonment, real or perceived. That's very important. Unstable or intense relationships. A lot of times this goes from idealization to devaluation. So loving them one minute, hating them the next. Unstable self-imagery or identity. Maybe it's constantly changing how they look or their careers or their hobbies in very drastic ways. Impulsivity, spending, sex, substance abuse, reoccurrent suicidal behavior or self-harm, emotional instability and rapid mood shifts, chronic feelings of emptiness, intense anger or different controlling anger, and then stress-related paranoia or dissociation. So what's important here is that this is often rooted in fear, attachment wounds, and emotional overwhelm. Narcissistic personality disorder, on the other hand, the traits as listed in the DSM 5 are grandiose sense of self importance, preoccupation with fantasies of success, power, beauty, or ideal love, belief that they are special or superior, need for excessive admiration, sense of entitlement, interpersonally exploitative, lack of empathy, envy of others or belief that others envy them, arrogant or haughty behaviors. So again, the DSM 5 says that you have to meet 5 of those criteria in order to meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. But again, it's really not that simple. These have to be persistent behaviors over a long period of time, have to be diagnosed by a clinician who has gone through a very thorough assessment that often involves more than one session, several sessions in order to diagnose someone with either one of these personality disorders. And these disorders are usually, from what the research shows, not diagnosed unless there is absence of trauma or other environmental factors that may be contributing to some of these symptoms. So this tends to be rooted in more protecting fragile sense of ego or self through control, superiority, or external validation when it comes to NPD. So when we talk about the intent versus impact breakdown, this is where it's really important because this is where people get confused because the impact can look the same. Both can lash out, be manipulative, can hurt people, be impulsive, can have very chaotic relationships, but the intent underneath it is different. The BPD lens is a lot more, okay, please don't leave me. It's often rooted in abandonment, right? That's a core attribute of people who suffer from BPD. Don't leave me. I'm overwhelmed. I feel unsafe. I need connection, but don't know how to ask for it. Oftentimes, their moments that are very triggering for them follow a very stressful event or something that triggers their fear of abandonment. And so a lot of it is fear-based, right? It's fear-driven and emotional overwhelm. Like, I just don't know how to control this right now. I feel overwhelmed, and therefore they are acting in ways that can be harmful. So NPD, when they react in these ways, when they lash out, it is to protect their image, maintain control, and avoid shame at all costs. It's also to make sure that they get validation and admiration. So their behavior is often self-protective through control, status, or detachment, and it has this layer of power and control. So again, the difference in intent matters. For BPD, it's to avoid abandonment, fear of loss, and overwhelm. For NPD, it's power and control, particularly around their image and getting the validation and getting their needs met. So I want to talk about dialectics because I want it to be a part of a lot of my episodes. I love dialectical behavioral therapy, and I want to point out that 2 things can be true at once. Someone can have trauma and still cause harm. Someone's intent can be rooted in pain and the impact can still be damaging. Understanding intent is not about excusing any sort of behavior. Nobody should put up with harmful behavior if they don't want to, but it is about responding accurately instead of reacting blindly. So imagine 2 people blow up your phone after a fight, right? One is panicking because they think you're going to abandon them, and the other is demanding responses because they feel entitled to your attention. Same behavior, different intent, different intervention. And so that's why it's very important to make sure that we know what these diagnoses truly are because the treatments for them are often very different. So if we only look at impact, everything starts to look the same. People start to be mislabeled, misdiagnosed, and that can create a lot of shame. But when we understand intent, patterns, and context, we stop pathologizing people incorrectly and we start responding in ways that actually create change. And I really just want to dive in just a little bit further into the 2 of these as well, because I think what's really hard is people who have a diagnosis of BPD or relate to some of borderline personality disorders traits often feel a lot of shame and they feel a lot of guilt for their behaviors. Oftentimes, when people that, from what I have seen and what the research shows, in times, people with BPD, after they lash out, they feel an immense amount of remorse, guilt, and shame, and they turn it inward. Why am I such a bad person? Why do I act the way that I do? Why can't I get it together? What is wrong with me? I'm broken. I don't deserve anyone. I don't deserve love. I should be alone. That is a very very common trait of people who have BPD as well, from what I have seen in the research and from people out in the community. NPD is going to look a lot different than that. And so I want to make sure I validate anyone who has any sort of resemblance of traits, fears that might relate to BPD. You have had things happen to you in your life, very likely, because again, the research shows that a lot of people who are diagnosed with both of these diagnoses have extreme amounts of chronic trauma, especially throughout childhood. Not everyone, but research does suggest that a majority of people who have been diagnosed with these two diagnoses have a lot of trauma. So for people in particular, and I'm not just singling out BPD, but it's something that I talk a lot about on this podcast, you have had things done to you that should have never happened to another person. And while it is your responsibility to get to know yourself, understand how you can have healthier behaviors for yourself and the people in your life, it is also, again, this idea of dialectics that's saying, I have reacted in this way and I have been harmed and it's not my fault. I am not perfect yet and I'm working on getting better. I have things to work on and I'm doing what I can to gain control over my emotions and be the person that I know that I am and live the life that I know that I deserve. And then on the NPD side, and this is something that I feel like we don't allow ourselves to talk about enough, because I do believe that people with NPD often get looked at as just complete evil people, have no ability to change, and they just don't get as much support as what I see circulating around the internet. And I think it's hard because when we say that, it almost comes across like we're validating what they've done and invalidating the experiences of people who have been harmed by narcissistic abuse, which is not what I'm doing at all. But I do think it's important because I think that overgeneralizing and labeling people with NPD is also extremely harmful, because a lot of times when we're talking about NPD on the internet, we're talking about this person is a narcissist, or I have been in a relationship with a narcissist, or if your partner does this, this, and this. Oftentimes we're actually talking about antisocial personality disorder, which is very different. It often involves criminal behavior. It's a lot more overt and a lot more disruptive societally, right? But people with NPD can also change and they can also grow. And I think a lot of times it's just hard for us to admit that, because it's a lot easier for people in the community, especially from what I have seen, people who have been harmed or are survivors of narcissistic abuse. It can make it a lot easier to process the harmful things that have happened to them by putting people in boxes and categories. And that is a trauma response. Research shows that that is a way of managing trauma within the brain. So again, you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think it's important to add the nuance and context that around 50 to 70% of individuals who are diagnosed with NP also have histories of trauma, and they can make progress and change as well. It is possible. And again, if you haven't already listened to the first episode, I go into why that number varies so much, 50 to 70%. There's a huge gap. There's reasoning behind that. Everything that I've mentioned in this episode, these are my opinions. This is what I've learned based off of the research and my experience in the community. And I want everyone to know that within the community of clinicians and in mental health, there's a lot of debate around this. So it is my personal opinion that there's no just exact truth, one all, be all. There is so much nuance to this. And I want to make sure that we can always hold 2, 3, 4 things at once that can all be true, and hold that nuance in the middle when we're talking about these things. Regardless of what you or your loved ones are going through, you on your healing journey, I'm proud of you, and you can do this. You can get through this. I know that it may seem like it's never ending, but you are very, very brave if you're embarking on your healing journey. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. If something in today's episode resonated, I love hearing from you. I read your stories and reflections, and many of the topics that we talk about on here come directly from what you share. If you feel called to reach out, you're always welcome to. You can find me on TikTok at It's Therapy K, on Instagram at NotSoDumbBlonde_pod, or on YouTube under the name Caitlin. Those are all great places to send messages, share experiences, or suggest topics that you'd like to hear discussed on the podcast. And if this episode felt supportive, following the show or sharing it with someone who might need it really helps the space grow. Take care of yourself, and thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you soon.